Hello and welcome. Well, the UK, France and Germany have made a joint appeal to President Trump and Iran's leaders to ease their standoff over Iran's nuclear program. They say the deal reached with Iran could unravel further and everyone involved should consider the consequences of their actions. It comes as leaked diplomatic cables reveal that the former British ambassador to Washington believed the US president pulled out of the deal to vandalise President Obama's legacy. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins reports.
Most of the current crisis in the Gulf can be traced back to Iran's controversial nuclear research. Britain, France and Germany still hope to keep alive the 2015 nuclear deal which limits this work. But President Trump abandoned it last year in favour of increased sanctions, and Iran says it is now breaching the deal because it's not delivering the promised economic benefits. This evening, Theresa May, Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel released a joint appeal, saying they were concerned by the risk that the nuclear agreement further unravels under the strain of sanctions imposed by the United States and following Iran's decision to no longer implement several of the central provisions of the agreement. They go on to urge all countries to pause and consider the possible consequences of their actions. That's likely to infuriate the White House, appearing to equate aspects of United States hardline policies with those of Iran. It comes on the day the Mail on Sunday published more leaked material saying that President Trump axed the nuclear deal to spite his predecessor. It's based on confidential reports from Sir Kim Darroch to Whitehall and to Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary. Mr. Johnson couldn't persuade the White House to stick with the deal. Whoever becomes next Prime Minister now faces a huge series of tasks, trying to keep secrets secret, trying to restore and rebuild confidence and morale here at the Foreign Office, and perhaps hardest of all, trying to win, not lose, influence in Washington.
At the moment, the relationship is not satisfactory for significant reasons that are actually much more important than these leaks, namely the Middle East policy, including towards Iran, the damaging policy which the United States is adopting.
Iran's president says his country is ready to talk to the United States, but only if Washington lifts sanctions and returns to the nuclear deal. When a big power is a bully, he said, well then we have to stand up to it. It must stop being a bully. We've always believed in talks. But the White House will not accept Iran's preconditions. The crisis at sea in the Gulf is no closer to being resolved. The major European powers hope they can still prevent it deteriorating into something far worse, armed conflict. James Robbins, BBC News.
And meanwhile, the BBC has gained rare access to Iran, where people had hoped to see the economy revived through the nuclear deal and the lifting of sanctions. Our correspondent Martin Patience has been talking to Iranians in the holy city of Qom and the capital Tehran with cameraman Nick Millard and producer Cara Swift. As with all foreign media, they were accompanied by a government official and there were restrictions on what they could film, but not what they could say. Here's their report.
Nationalism, pride and resistance. It's religion that fuels Iran's politics. But now the choreographed chants of death to our enemies are growing louder. The religious city of Qom is where clerics have kept the revolutionary flame alive for 40 years. It's where resistance to America is strongest.
Donald Trump is a liar, is an unpredictable person. He is not representative of Satan. He is Satan himself. He is a Satan.
Donald Trump is Satan?
Yeah. Because, the Satan does everything that he does.
The US accuses Iran's religious leaders of wanting to develop nuclear weapons, of seeking to dominate the region. By pulling out of the nuclear deal, Donald Trump strengthened Iran's hardliners who say that America should never have been trusted in the first place. But many here know that political Islam doesn't have the same appeal as it did 40 years ago. Iran's changing.
The
In the capital, Tehran, clerics compete with pop stars for influence. Most Iranians were born after the 1979 revolution. The younger generation is more open to the world. It's these liberal Iranians that Donald Trump believes he can win over. But instead, anti-American sentiment is unifying Iran.
It's true that Iran is pushing very hard on the issue of nuclear energy. Perhaps we are pushing too hard, but if nuclear energy is bad for us, then it should be bad for everyone else as well.
The US and Iran needn't be enemies. The paint on this mural is fading. 4 years ago, with the nuclear deal, America and Iran showed they could reach an agreement. But it was never built on trust. What happened here 40 years ago has poisoned relations ever since. Iranian students stormed the US embassy, holding American diplomats hostage for more than a year.
I was from the first day here. This is me. It was Christmas. We wanted the American hostages.
Hussein Sheikh al-Islam was one of the hostage takers and later a government minister. This is his message to America.
There is no way, if he continues like that, that Iranian people and their leadership can trust their future with Mr. Trump.
But he says the last nuclear agreement was too generous. And
What is the guarantee the president after that doesn't say something else?
But he says it was too generous and it allowed Iran to meddle in the Middle East.
But this is not the way. This is not the way.
Are you worried that there will be a war between America and Iran?
There is not going to be a war, because a war against us means killed American soldiers. And he is not ready to make a funeral in Washington, D.C.
The former embassy is a reminder of the limits of American power. Many Iranians believe that the US has not learnt that lesson. Iran's history is defined by its struggle against foreign nations. And today, America and its allies confront Iran at their own peril. Martin Patience, BBC News, Tehran.
Special report from inside Iran. Britain, France and Germany have appealed for an end to escalating tensions over Iran's nuclear program. Let's get more on that story. Behnam Ben Tailblue is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, where he focuses on Iranian security and political issues. He joins us now from Berlin. Behnam, thank you so much for your time. The UK, France and Germany have made this joint appeal to the United States. Do you think Iran is going to be happy with that?
Well, good morning and good to be with you. Currently, I think not. The Iranians have been using their incremental nuclear escalation to continue this transatlantic road that exists between Washington and the European states, to be able to get the Europeans to sick onto America and to erode this pressure campaign that has been in effect now for a year. I think it's a worthwhile attempt by the Europeans to keep some sort of diplomatic architecture alive. But what America, I think, is seeking from Europe is the exact opposite, to collapse the deal from within in response to these new Iranian violations.
So Europe still hopes to try and make a difference. What more could they possibly do, or is it all too late?
I don't think it's too late, but it's not too late if you think that collapsing the deal or removing or restoring the previous international consensus that used to exist on Iran's nuclear program is a good idea. In fact, that's how we got to the JPOA and JCPOA nuclear deal to begin with. The sanctions that Washington has restored in the past year were the same ones that helped lay the way for America and its international partners to, in fact, get Iran to come to the negotiating table. So the Europeans could stand up for non-proliferation norms, could help close this transatlantic gap, respond to Iran's nuclear violations, tout a desire for a deal, and be able to do this all at the same time. It's just that right now the Europeans fear that that kind of initial collapse of the deal is more escalatory and thus something they're afraid of.
But despite what Europe tries to do, how can they possibly change the course that the US is on, and the US being determined to continue with sanctions which are crippling Iran?
Well, the U.S. is determined to continue with sanctions, but the goal of those sanctions is to get Iran to come to the negotiating table. And if the Europeans do want a framework and are now, after many years, acknowledging some of the initial faults or fatal flaws, as many in the Trump administration like to say, of that nuclear deal, then there is space where both sides can close the transatlantic gap and not let Iran, the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism, continue to escalate this row between both allies and be able to play one side off of another. I think sanctions, again, are key here. Many European states, even before acknowledging some of the issues in the nuclear deal, have cited Iran's long-standing non-nuclear threats, be it missile, military, cyber, terrorism, human rights even. Sanctions by European states there could be quite helpful, and that could help, again, bridge the gap.
Isn't there a danger here that there's a bit of pride or losing of face concern on both sides? The more the US tighten the screws, the less likely Iran is going to want to be seen to be the first to reach out an olive branch and talk to the US.
Well, that's why I think America and, in fact, everyone's understanding of how we got to the JCPOA nuclear deal is important, but also an understanding of how Iran makes national security decisions. Only very few times have Iranian leaders done an about-face. If you look at the Iran-Iraq war, which was 8 years long, for the first 7.5 years, Iran's leaders said war until victory. They wanted to change the regime in Iraq. That should sound familiar. But again, when faced with grim realities, they couldn't do that. And Khomeini, the founding father of the Islamic Republic, said that he was going to have to drink from a poisoned chalice and accept a UN-sponsored ceasefire. So states, even revolutionary states like Iran, will settle for less than optimal situations when faced with a real choice. And that's the goal of the sanctions here, to kind of narrow the options and put Iran to that choice, bring them back.
All right, Ben Tailblue, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.